Hi, here we'll present the three readings for week 4. And the first reading is titled as Policing the Boundary of Sex, a critical examination of gender verification and Caster-Semenya controversy. The reading is mainly divided into 4 sections. The first one is the introduction of the controversy, followed by sex testing history in competitive sports, and also assumptions of sex testing, so basically why it has existed, and finally conclusion and aftermath of Caster-Semenya sex testing. So who is Caster-Semenya? She won gold in women's 800 meters at 2009 World Championship, the 2016 Summer Olympics, and 2017 World Championships. However, the controversy started immediately after she won her first gold medal in 2009, when the International Association of Athletics Federations requested a gender verification test on her because of, quote, her deep voice, muscular build, and rapid improvement at times. Although they verified her as a female, the action itself is very controversial, and until this day, because of her naturally high testosterone levels, she was sometimes banned from competitions depending upon the policies at times. Caster-Semenya was not the only female athlete who faced sex testing, and in fact, sex testing can be traced back to the beginning when females entered competitive sports. So before 1966, female athletes were judged based on physical appearance and sometimes needed to go through a so-called nude parade in front of a group of inspectors. Then, from 1967 to 2011, female athletes need to take chromosome tests where XX pairing means woman and XY pairing indicates man. And from 2011 till this day, the sports world adopted checking testosterone level either below 10 or 5 nanomole per liter. And it is under the latest rule that Caster-Semenya sometimes fail to even qualify as a female athlete. So why does sex testing exist? According to the author of the article, it originates from 3 assumptions that first, sex is a binary category in sports, meaning that sports competition is solely divided among male and female candidates. Second, sports is a level playing field, meaning unfair advantages need to be policed to achieve the integrity. And finally, intersex athletes have an unfair advantage because, particularly for female, it is believed that the testosterone level is linked with sports performance, and thus female athletes like Semenya are viewed to have an unfair advantage over other female athletes. However, he also challenges the third assumption and viewed the assumption itself as unfairly implemented. For sports governing bodies, sex testing is necessary because of the underlying belief that all biological males are stronger, bigger, faster, and thus superior athletes when compared to all biological women competing in the same sports. Hence, sex testing legitimates sex segregation as necessary to ensure a level playing field in sports. Yet, the author argues that there is no definitive evidence for the belief, and in addition, there's no sex testing for male. So what happened for those male athletes was much higher testosterone level than others, and do they need to suppress their natural testosterone level to compete, just like Semenya? Aftermath of the controversy is that the voice of Caster Semenya was mainly silenced after the 2009 Berlin World Championships. And recently, in 2019, the IAF issued a new rule that prevents women such as Semenya from participating in 400 meters, 800 meters, and 1500 meters events unless they take medication to lower their testosterone levels. They justified their rules stating that such discrimination is necessary and reasonable to preserve the integrity of female athletics. And here's a catch to the rule that until this day, only female athletes who are identified as suspicious need to be tested, and there's no clarity as of who are deemed to be suspicious, opening the door to potential sex testing that aims to people with different cultural background and appearances.
Okay, let's move to the second one. Youth football is a moral abdication. Kathleen Baczynski attempted to arouse our notice on the negative consequences of a dangerous sport, football, which brought to the youth, or specifically children. In the first section, the author declares that in the past, certain attention had already been paid on football. The observation on the repeatedly collision, considered as the main component of football, had already given public the hint of the physical ruins on young generations. With the popularity of the game growing, it seems that the public ignores the fact of hidden threat and prompted the game for boys of all ages. While nowadays, it might be much easier to understand the dangers of repeated concussion than in the past. The author drew the thesis statement that, if continued the ignorance, it would be an abdication of moral responsibility for children's welfare. In the second section, supporters of football sought ways to refuse the warning from doctors and educators, which might result in continuing popularity of the game. First, fans were accustomed to the scene of physical harm and thought its nature and cheerful. Second, parents were passionate to allow their children to play, meanwhile made efforts to minimize risks. Third, children were educated to believe the sport taught leadership skills, which would be good to future business and military careers. In the third section, the author employed a lot of reference, which will aim to prove the damage of concussion involved in the football game, which could bring to the brain, and suggests boys under age 16 should not be encouraged in participation. However, the fact the author mentioned was that more and more young boys under 15 were involved in the game, while young boys failed to be aware of and weigh the potential harm to the brain. At the end, the author believes the debate was worthwhile if it could arouse attention to make a difference, and stress again his attempt that repeated collision could bring harm for human bodies or brains. It's obvious that the author tried to announce the harm football game brought. On one hand, public might have already known the negative consequences. On the other hand, they still support their children to engage in the game. From the references the author provided, it's not hard to find professional doctors and educators had already given the warning with abundant evidence. What made it curious was that why the public would rather embrace the potential risk than follow the restrictions on age to play. Here the author seemed not to analyze the reason and provide with possible measures to solve the problem. As mentioned in the article, children hardly analyzed and weighed the risks themselves. Certain surveys need to be made to discover the reasons why children chose to participate in the game and their opinions on this game, which might be helpful to find out the solution. As far as I'm concerned, they should get education in schools and families where they receive the knowledge of the sports. The question is whether schools understand the risk and make efforts to convey the message to parents need to be asked. Also, it's important to make it clear what the attitude of government upon the risk of football is. Okay, that's all my idea on the second reading. Let's move on to the third one, On the Shoulders of Giants. The podcast On the Shoulder of Giants mainly discussed about an event of Colin Kaepernick, who refused standing for the national anthem at an NFL game, which there was no wonder that the event soon became a hot topic. A few background information about the attribution Colin made was mentioned, which he brought the San Francisco 49ers to Super Bowl win in 2013. As an African American athlete, Colin began to realize the situation in the country and tried to make real efforts on protesting violence against African Americans. The response to this action from President Donald Trump was that it is unpatriotic and disrespectful to the military and the country. The result was that Colin lost a job and was blackballed, while Colin continued to struggle and devote to lawsuits for proper rights. There was no doubt that this rebellion was for the justice and equity for African Americans, which called for more attention and awakening. From the name of On the Shoulder of Giants, It's nature to remind public of giants in the past in pursuing rights for African Americans. From a soundbite of archived broadcasts, it's been told that why public need to have a good understanding of history was that people could teach their kids with eyes open better, which explains the reason to introduce the three giants in the history. The first giant is called Jack Johnson, born in 1878, Texas. He was the first African American heavyweight champion of the world. He persisted in fighting with a white champion, which at that time was unusual. At last, he made it and became well known. What made it a difference was not just the victory of fight itself, but the calling for justice and equity with white people. However, it aroused concern from the white public that the African American could also fight back. The government made actions and brought him to trial. The second giant named Wilma Rudolph, an African American female athlete who was born with polio, but at the age of 16, she won the bronze medal at the Olympics and later set various records. However, Wilma still bore the discrimination and failed to gain the full citizenship rights even though she was already a superstar. The experiences abroad encouraged her to stand up and protect civil rights for the African American people. Unfortunately, she lost her job and had difficulty in surviving. The third giant named Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, who played very well and was one of the few Muslim NBA players. It's worth noting that he refused to stand for the anthem in that he began to think over the meaning rather than accept it without a doubt. The press exaggerated his expression that American flag was the symbol of oppression and put him in a controversial situation. Again, he was erased in the sport history and lost the career. It's not hard to detect the important role of white experience was played in broadening one's view. In the past, people from another country might not have the equal chances of education and fail to discover the world. With the eyes open, they gradually awakened and struggled for the rights not only for themselves, but the whole race. Nowadays, with the technology developed, people could get any information easily and realize everyone has his own equal rights. It's hard to believe Colin still failed to secure his rights nowadays. When the government promotes the freedom and equality of people, it's supposed to listen to the sound of everyone, rather than simply tag someone as unpatriotic or disrespectful. Okay, that's all for our presentation. Thanks everyone for listening.